Hello, I'm Tony Goldstone, and I'm going to take you through one of the other intermediate tabs called the Factors tab. But just before I go to that, I'm just going to give this consultant some added years, which will just help me explain some of the columns. So I've set this consultant to have 6 added years between the ages of 30 or 60. It's important to realise that if you don't have added years, you shouldn't delete these 2 cells here. You can just keep the added years set to 0 in this step. So I'm going to go back to my table of contents and click through to the Factors tab. And the Factors tab is where a lot of the hard work of the engine of the spreadsheet happens, because all of the 10 or so calculation sheets will pull through values from this. And some of the values you can't change or are not in use currently, and by default you shouldn't be able to click in cells that you shouldn't be able to change. So I'm just going to take through the columns. There's a few cells at the top which you can change, which I'll come through to when I reach the respective bits. So column A is tax year starting. You can't change anything there. So for example, 2017 is the 2017/18 tax year, so the year ending March 2018. And then columns B and C both relate to inflation, and you can see that there's approximately a year delay between the September to September CPI, which is published on the ONS site each year, and the CPI value that's used for the opening value for the calculation of annual allowance. So you can see there's a step change there. And that also relates to the so-called revaluation coefficient, which is basically a function of CPI as well. And the revaluation is the amount that your 2015 pension is revalued by each year. So in column 5, we've got the 2015 accrual. That's currently based at 1 and 54th, but there is currently a revaluation of the scheme going on, and that was meant to increase to 1 over 48.1 from April 2019, but that's currently on hold while some litigation is being sorted out. But if you wish to change that based on the values of the new rate, that can be changed in this value here. If you change that to a 1, that will change that to 1 in 48.1. So just going back to the Factors tab. So you remember in that initial step I changed it so that this consultant had 6 added years. And those 6 added years were calculated at a value of 0.2 added years per year. So what that meant for that consultant is that prior to transition in 2015, he would have got his 1 calendar year each year, because it was 1 calendar year hence, in addition to the 0.2 added years. So prior to 2015, each year he would have got 1.2 years per year added onto his TRS statement. And then after transition, most consultants would just have 0 here, because they're not continuing to accrue in the 2008 or the 1995 sections. So those values would be 0. But because this consultant's got added years, you can see that there's a value of 0.2. Now, the reason that these are user editable is if you are a consultant that's had transitional protection, and that transitional protection didn't end in April in 1 year, then you need to make a manual adjustment in these steps. And the manual adjustment is described here in the user guide. And there's an example here, for example, of a consultant that had transitional protection to come over to the new scheme in August 2017. And if you came over in August, that means that you've got a split year. So by coming over in August, it would have meant that April, May, June and July were in the old 1995 scheme, and then the remainder 8 months of the year would have been in the new scheme. So this means that in the year that they came across, they would have had 1/3 of a year, or 0.33 recurring in the 1995 section for that year. So that value of 0.33 could have been put in the relevant column of the years in 1995. But this consultant example is particularly complicated because, as well as having transitional protection, he's also got added years. And like the example that I've just shown in the video, he has 0.2 added years per year. So that means in the year that he's come across, we need to give him his 0.2 years from his added years contract, in addition to his 0.33 years. And you need to calculate that manually. So in this example, that consultant would have had a value of 0.5333, being his 0.2 added years and his 0.33 related to his month of transitional protection. But for the vast majority of people, you won't need to make that manual edit. So just coming back to the factors tab, so that's the years in 1995 section, so most people won't need to go there. The marginal rate isn't currently active, but maybe in a future version. And then column 9 is the contribution rate. So by default, the model assumes that your contribution rate is 14.5%. The contribution rates are different in each of the nations, and they'll also be different for members who have added years. So if, for example, you pay, let's say, 3% for your added years contract, and your normal contribution rate is 14.5%, you should change those values to 14.5 plus 3% or 17.5%. So that's why these values are user editable. So column J is the SCAPE interest rate or the SCAPE discount rate. And this is the rate of interest which, when added to inflation or CPI, makes the loan interest rate for scheme pays. And that decreased from 2.8% to 2.4% in April 2019, and then of course that's added to the CPI to produce a compounding interest rate. So we've already discussed added years, and because this consultant has added years at the rate of 0.2 per year, we can see that that value of 0.2 exists there, and then we can see that that ends in 2038 in this example, and that's because this consultant has reached his retirement age for the contract. So this consultant had a contract up until 2038, so you can see there's no additional added years after that. But if you want to be able to model the effect of stopping your added years contract, you can do so in this cell here. So for example, let's say you wanted a model ending in 2020, you can see that currently from 2020 this still continues up until the end of the contract. But if you put 2020 in there, you can see that those 0.2 added years per year stop there, and then you can model the effect of that in the various modelling sheets. But I'll just reset that back to where it was. You don't need to play with column 12. Column 13 is based on actual known lifetime allowances in red, and then in the blue cells that's predicted to continue growing at the rate of inflation. These next two cells are based on modelling the potential for a 50-50 model, where you would be contributing half the accrual rate. So because this consultant is contributing at 14.5% for 1 54th, he would contribute half of that 14.5% or 7.25% for half the accrual. So instead of getting an accrual rate of 1 over 54, he would get an accrual rate of 1 over 108. So future pay is something that you can change. It's based on the historic pay awards of around 1%. So you can see that the long-term pay is at 1%, which is of course below our inflation estimate of 2%, and that's because historically we've had sub-inflationary pay awards. This has got the pay awards in England for 1718 and 1819 and 1920, and then just that future of 1%, but you can change those based on your own predictions or any known or announced pay awards as and when they're announced. So column Q is important for consultants who are less than full-time. This is the only column that you need to change based on less than full time. So all of these columns here, you shouldn't be able to click in because they're fixed. And essentially you only need to put in the changes at the top of each of the red and the blue section. So if you're a full-time consultant, that should read 100 and 100 and then not need to change. But for example, let's say you were 80% full-time back in 2011/12, and then you decreased to 60%. You would just put the 60% change, so you can see that's gone 80, 80, 80, and then 60. And then let's say you went back up to 80% in that year, and you can see that you just need to put in the changes. You shouldn't put in 80, 80 or 60, 60 here, or that will upset the spreadsheet. So I'll just delete those and go back to our previous 100%. So as I said, columns R to Y, you don't need to change. And then we come across to the employer rate for pension contributions. So up until 1819, the employer rate was based at 14.8%, and then that's increased from 1920 to 20.6%. And then column AA is a function of that. So that's your employer's NI percentage. And then columns 28 and 29 are for the policy that your own trust or employer has for recycling pension contributions. So you can see in this example here, column 29 shows zeros, and that means that the employer is not giving any of the employer pension contribution back for members that come out of the scheme. And the BMA policy is that they should be giving all of the recycled employee contribution back, less employers NI, in such a way that is cost neutral for the taxpayer. So for example, if you go to the advanced Hokey option, so that was that default of no recycling, but if I now change that to the BMA recycling policy, and then I go across to factors, I can now see that that column 28 is changed to 0%, i.e. the employer is not retaining any of the employees' employer contributions, and then the remaining 17.76% from 2019-20 goes back to the employee as gross pay. And you can refer to the BMA model policy to see the BMA recommendations on employer contribution recycling. And then in the remaining columns from column 30 through 39, there's no user editable columns. These are all actuarial factors that are pulled through based on your age that are used for various bits of the models. And that completes the factors tab. Thank you very much.